theory is, well, because we work with technology, right? And it's this idea of, you know, becoming cyborg or something. Like, that's really interesting to me. We're always attached to our phones and our laptops, and I mean, I brought mine. I don't even know why now. So this idea of object making comes from, like, okay, I want to be a cyborg, or I want to attach electronics to myself. And that becomes our object, I guess. But we were talking about this today, that I guess I don't really, that's kind of like the material, like the wires and electricity, and but we spend so much time figuring it out and soldering it, and so these things, these very fragile electronics, become these precious objects that we never really talk about or show, or I don't know. So but the product ends up being a video, so it's kind of like this strange relationship with objects. Like, I don't want to be an object maker, but I still make objects to help my performances. And as far as theory goes, you know, this idea of becoming cyborg or something, and then, you know, someone will mention, I mean, Micha knows a lot about theory, and she'll say, well, maybe you should read Donna Haraway, and then all of a sudden I'm reading Donna Haraway. So it's, for me, like, the idea of, or whatever interests me comes first, and then I go to the theory.
I kind of like the idea of dealing with theory or thinking about it as kind of an activism, because to me, I guess the things that I would put clearly in the category of theory are kind of an academic activism. It's sort of an assertion of what are we doing, and maybe not, you know, like the things that we make in our studios, that's our own personal thing, but the what are we doing isn't about those, it's about the serious what are we doing question. And I think I can't think of a thing that I would put in the category of theory that I've read that I would say isn't a kind of proposal or an activism to try and figure that question out. And you know, just to drop buzzwords, I think, is maybe not the point, but there is a kind of language in the field that you know, if I went into an operating room and didn't have a knowledge of a vocabulary of a surgeon, I would be in serious trouble. And so I think it's easier to communicate with people about the question, what are we doing, in regards to the objects or the non-objects we make, and also, like, really, what are we doing here? That's the big MFA question.
So I'm gonna sort of completely flip it to the other side, because we've sort of been talking about, you know, very abstract through the theory, but we also sort of touched in on sort of objects or creating visual experiences. And so, of course, my sort of next thing right after we hit theory on the list is sort of issues of materiality in making. And I wanted actually to start right there with Bryan, because he extensively talked about this in his essay for Glamfa. And one thing that I thought was particularly interesting in that essay was the sort of relationship you set up between the choice of materials or sort of investment in materiality and the way that the practice was then positioned within sort of the institution itself. So that sort of choice being, in a way, a political, maybe, stance within the institution. So I was hoping, Bryan, you could start a little bit by clarifying or correcting what I just said, and then we'll sort of open it up to other people to sort of give their thought on that.
Well, I mean, we all make stuff, and I have a really, I think in 2009, with all of the, I mean, whether you believe Al Gore or not, I mean, we have some problems in the world, and so my relationship with stuff and materials is kind of it's sort of complicated and scary, because I think we really need to, if we're taking these raw materials, you know, found objects or art Vera aside, I think if we're taking these materials and turning them into something else, that's kind of serious and important. And I think in the essay I used Eben's work as sort of an example of working with materials as a kind of a spiritual meditation, or this kind of a non-religious ceremony when you're in the studio and you want to see what happens, and you're just curious about things. I think that really is at the heart of why we make stuff. That's kind of, I don't know, it's not an excuse, but it's the reason, because we're curious people, or at least I think some of us are. That's why we're here. So I would just say that, and I would kind of put a dark cloud on the whole issue with environmental concerns. I don't know if that's so important to a lot of people, but as someone who works with earth and turns it into rock, it's important to me.
I mean, one thing I maybe want to add is, because when I think of materials, I think of, mud, and I think of photo, but I also think of the body as a material to be used in art practice, as a completely sort of valid sort of object to begin at. So I wanted to sort of open that up. And maybe, because I know that there's quite a few, undergrads here as well, a more simple question to sort of just get an idea of, because I can vaguely remember trying to make art myself and getting stuck at that place of like, why am I using why is this even important? So maybe a more simple sort of way to start is how do you end up at the materials you do use to create this visual experience? Because we have a huge range of sort of different kinds of materials being used, from the body to wax to photos to flocking. So I think that would be maybe something that might help a lot of people out of the audience, is to sort of maybe how we've individually worked through how we get to what we use. And I'll open that up to anybody.
I guess I can speak to that just a little, because when you first brought up the topic of materials, I just drew a blank, because I just take pictures and that's the beginning and the end of it. But when you mentioned bodies, I realized that what I have always done is to take photographs or document people. In my case, mostly men of a certain age who have profound body issues, whether they're on meds of one kind or another, or they're unattractive, they think they're of a certain size, a certain age. So once I got beyond the fact that I primarily take photographs, whether it's film or digital or video, my material is reaching into the community, getting to know human beings, developing relationships with them. Some of them I know for that very day, some of them I've known for many years. Getting to know them, inviting them to participate in projects, having them pose for me one way or another. So it's like my material is and this might go back to the activism. It's getting into my community, working with people. Working even sounds too lofty. Just sort of working on projects together, photographing them in one way or another, and then now with the exhibition that I have up of these images, having workshops where we talk about language, the root of language, the meaning of words marriage and husband, and does it apply, and labels and so on. So it's almost like my material is the process of it's experiencing other people, and just photographing them or documenting them one way or another is sort of a byproduct of that experience, as opposed to clay or.
Who else wants to touch that?
Well, I know that when I start on any project or piece, regardless of what I'm using, I always think about what that material does best. So when I make photos, I always think about, what does a photo do best? What does a video do best? What is the flocking doing that, paint wouldn't do versus clay or even SRAM, right?